Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCast, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Welcome everybody to the Climate and Coordination RCast. This week we have some fabulous and interesting and controversial things to talk about. So I'm just going to get started here with the first story here. This comes from Cointelegraph, which is a big crypto publication online, and this is from just I think 3 days ago. The headline is blockchain firm Bitfury partners with UN on forest project in Kazakhstan. So I will put the link to this in the chat. And so this is an interesting story, but I do find it to be a little bit controversial. So here's what it says. Basically, they are partnering, Bitfury is partnering with the United Nations to basically conserve and increase Kazakhstan's forest land. So they want to plant a lot of trees there. And I guess the whole idea is first because Bitfury wants to offset its own carbon footprint by planting these trees. But I guess the hope is that beyond that, it will also help to reduce, obviously, emissions because trees really help with carbon sequestration. It says the project aims to help the country to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 15% over the coming decade and meet its commitments in the 2016 Paris Agreement. Now, the reason I find this to be controversial, even though I think it's a good idea, I still think they should do it. But first off, the Paris Agreement, for those of you who don't know, the Paris Agreement, even if all the countries in the world meet the Paris Agreement, we're still going to be way under the reductions needed to keep the planet basically habitable, keep it under hopefully 1.5 degrees. And then the disaster scenario would be 2 degrees. And then, there are many scientists who say even that's not possible. We're definitely going to warm it by 3 or 4 or more, which means no ice at the poles, coral reefs extinct, fires, it would be insane. But even, past 1.5 degrees, there are island nations in the world that call that genocide if we go past 1.5 degrees. And the Paris Agreement does not get us there. So the idea that just trying to reach the Paris Agreement within the next 10 years, I think is ludicrous, really slow, and completely negates or ignores the seriousness and the pace that we are seeing the climate changing already now. And the other thing that I think is controversial about it, just aside from it being a very low goal, but also a good one because every little bit helps, I guess, is that, they're not using the greenest, the most efficient blockchain. If they used a type of blockchain like, RChain is developing a blockchain which is going to be way less energy intensive. And I'm actually writing a blog about that right now. So I'm going to need to get some specifics on that. But Greg has talked so many times about how important it is that RChain be more efficient and not waste so much energy, because a lot of people criticize, blockchain technology in its current form as being way too energy intensive. So I think just to plant all these trees, excuse me, to offset their own footprint is just a little bit weak. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, well, I'm just reading through the article, and near the end,
it says that there's a quote from Bitfury's head of renewables that says cryptocurrency mining is excellently suited for countries that want to transition into green economies. Contrary to public perception about its negative effect on the environment, cryptocurrency mining can help advance the adoption and growth of renewable energies by incentivizing investment in these assets. So if I'm understanding the rationale there, it's like, yeah, we're burning up so much electricity that you're going to really want to make some renewables happen quickly. It's kind of an interesting approach.
Yeah,
I totally get it. I mean, who wants to go back to the caveman days, right? We need electricity. No matter how you look at it, we need electricity.
Oh yeah,
it's
absolutely.
It's just our source of electricity that is bad, but we can't like stop using electricity.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
Nobody could ever advocate for that, and that's kind of not a very accurate talking point to say to go back to the caveman days.
No, but come on, Nora. I mean, sometimes I hear everybody, they say, I agree, we need renewables, but
yeah,
but nobody wants to give up electricity, and
well, of course not.
So we have to find ways and it's not going to be all or nothing. It's probably for the next generation. It's probably going to be some kind of hybrid approach until some massive breakthrough happens.
Well, yeah, not only that, like
will.
Most sustainable solutions that are proposing transferring away from oil, of course, involve electricity. So we're talking about a massive increase in electricity consumption. So
yeah.
we need to figure out a solution that for linear supply of electricity. There isn't a solution now. The only solution now is nuclear. And there's some proponents who say, nuclear is a good idea.
Well,
I heard there's a whole technology on the miniaturization of nuclear. I'm not really for nuclear, but they have.
Well, yeah. So both of you, I think, need to just maybe be slightly corrected, because first off, there are other technologies. Like, we've had designs for hydrogen cars and all these things, but it's just that because of the fossil fuel industry basically stamping all of these out, and just saying, no, we're not going to do it. We haven't had any movement on this, even for 40 years, basically since the 80s, since we knew the climate crisis was happening or going to happen. But the other thing is that there's other types of nuclear. I believe thorium is another option, which is way safer than what we use now. And so nuclear,
that's the source. It's still fusion, right? It's still nuclear fusion.
Right.
But there are other materials in addition to uranium that have a shorter half-life and are safer.
Right. Yeah. So
and that's what I was talking about. Also, it allows more miniaturization. You don't have to build these massive nuclear power plants.
Right, but that also is not great. Like, for the ocean, a lot of times the power plants are along a waterway to offer cooling for the reactors, and then also they have to dump enormous amounts of super hot water into the ocean, which can kill large amounts of areas of wildlife and fish and stuff. So there's still a lot of problems with nuclear, but I think possibly that could be a transition fuel. But another thing is that we don't really have time for to transition forever, because our carbon budget is going to be up in 10 years or less. So if we go past that, then we ensure that we're going to heat the world by more than 1.5 degrees. So if we're talking about let's get to the Paris Agreement in 10 years, which is what this article says is the big goal, I just find that to suffer from a poverty of ambition, frankly. And I think they should do a lot more. If they really want to offset themselves, they should not just focus on that. They should do that, and then above and beyond that, they should offset even more. Because right now it's just most of the idea is for them to offset their own emissions. And so I just think if everybody just does that, then basically what happens because the offset is not right away, right? So Bitfury is going to do all this mining, they're going to do all this stuff, and then they plant some trees, but the trees take a long time to grow, and so the carbon was still used. So there are some climate scientists that call carbon offsets in similar programs. They say they're likening them to rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. So I'm very skeptical of carbon offsets, but I still think it's better than doing nothing. So I still think they should do this.
Yeah, I think it's increasingly clear that today's technology is not going to solve the problem. We're going to have to come up with new solutions.
Exactly.
There's kind of no way around it at this point.
Yeah.
But I have hope. I have hope that we're on a path to be coming up with these rapid new solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And, that actually is such a great way to transition to the second story that I had today, which both Daryl and I thought would be a really good one. So that's a good sign when both of us come upon something. So this was reported by the BBC a few days ago, and then in the last 24 hours, a bunch of other news outlets have picked it up. So the headline is "Climate Change to Drive Massive Investment Shift," and it's a really exciting story about how financial markets and the wealth managers are really starting to consider that things are going to have to change. So maybe Daryl can talk about this because he made so many great notes about it, but I will put the link in the chat of at least the first place that I saw this story, but it's basically everywhere. If you just type in BlackRock, which is the name of the firm, which kind of came out and started talking about this, you'll see it, but it's in the chat. So Daryl, would you like to go ahead with this?
Yeah, sure. So there's I snatched up a couple other articles. It's pretty big news this week because BlackRock is the world's biggest fund manager, in like the biggest in the world, $7 trillion in assets. And so I'll just read from an article from the LA Times about it. BlackRock Inc., the world's biggest fund manager with $7 trillion in assets, said Tuesday it plans to place sustainability at the center of our investment approach. Chairman and CEO Larry Fink said in his annual letter to corporate executives that BlackRock will take steps to address the issue across the thousands of companies in which it invests. Fink wrote that the risks posed by rising world temperatures will affect both our physical world and the global system that finances economic growth. BlackRock said it is seeking a tenfold increase in the assets dedicated to sustainable investments in the coming decade to $1 trillion from about $90 billion currently. So that's a huge shift. The world's biggest fund manager, who's been investing in all sorts of things, including, probably one of the largest investors in oil, if not the largest, is looking at sustainability as something that is more economically viable to focus on than oil.
Yeah, that's cool. That's like a 10x increase on their part, a little more than 10x.
Yeah. It's cool. It's not, I don't think it's lip service. I mean, maybe some of it is, maybe some of it is its attempt to save face while they kind of still invest in oil, because they're not stopping, their investment in oil immediately, but I think it's more than lip service. He wouldn't say it in that way.
No, I don't think I think everybody realizes it.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that, our government has been the slowest and still deny it, but people realize it. And, there's been a lot of articles at the end of the year, beginning of the new year, which was also the change of the decade, about the changing tide in economic investment, and that renewables and green could have a potential, along with technology, the big sectors for the next coming number of years.
Exactly.
Right.
Like that's where the big money is going to go. And this is clear this week. Like to me, like something shifted this week because of this announcement. Like it's pretty massive.
Yeah, I think
Sorry, go ahead, Nora.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's pretty clear that Larry Fink, the guy who runs this company, BlackRock, the way he kind of talked about the climate crisis, and he said in the near future and sooner than most anticipate, there'll be a significant reallocation of capital. He seems to be somebody who is not, confused about the shift that is needed. And I found that, surprisingly, I found it to be inspiring actually reading this. That's it's very exciting, and I think it's something that a lot of companies and asset managers are waking up to, that as I'm writing in this new blog that I'm working on for the Archain blog, the most expensive route is to do nothing on the climate crisis. So anyway, Daryl, you can keep going, but I just wanted to say that because it seems like he's really not confused about what's happening. So that's a good sign.
Yeah. There's some other quotes from some other articles that I'd like to just kind of mention, because I think it kind of hammers it home. There's this quote from Bloomberg about it, which says, this is quoting from Fink, climate change has become a defining factor in companies' long-term prospects. Awareness is rapidly changing, and I believe we are on the edge of a fundamental reshaping of finance. So we're talking about a sea change, a massive shift. In the Pittsburgh Gazette, it says, BlackRock is now throwing their weight behind what already exists, a global movement to really address sustainability in portfolios, said Kirsten Snow Spalding, Senior Department Director of Ceres's Investor Network. They're not the first to the party, but just adding their weight is critical. One of the companies that has taken a position on climate issues is Goldman Sachs, which in December said that it will no longer lend money to oil and gas projects in the Arctic. The bank said it considered climate and effects on indigenous people and wildlife. We will decline any financing transaction that directly supports new upstream Arctic oil exploration or development, Goldman said. This includes, but is not limited to, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Another quote from Fink. Fink said he has increasingly heard from clients worldwide who want to factor climate change into their investment portfolios. So he's seeing pressure. And he says that he expects a marked generational change as young people increasingly focus on sustainable investing. Fink said financial investing will have to play a role in a huge energy transition over the coming decades. That includes weighing whether fossil fuels, for example, are a good investment both today and 10 years down the line. So he's literally saying that that oil isn't that interesting to me anymore as an investment.
Yeah, and that is such a great thing that you just said, because Ian, you want to say what you found about this story, if you want to.
Yeah, there was the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis published a 92-page report saying that over a 10-year period, BlackRock lost over $90 billion of its investors' money, due largely to ignoring global climate risk and investing in all that oil. So this is why they're doing it.
Wow.
Yeah, so when people get financially incentivized to change, I think that's really when things start to happen quickly. And I think, again, I'm going to say, as I've said in every call I think we've ever had, I think it's a little sad that, losing your investment portfolio is the first thing, like, that makes these people change. Not, oh, maybe my grandchildren should be able to have clean air. But, again, I'm just going to put it out there, but that's the country we live in. And another thing I wanted to say is that it's very often argued by, even members of Congress, but certainly on Twitter and other places, that, oh, well, America, we're not going to change what we're doing because, oh, look how much China is emitting. And, other countries, even though America, the United States, has contributed the most to climate change over time, we're not the number one emitter anymore. Obviously we've been surpassed. So that's an argument that's often made, but I saw this amazing testimony by Jamie Margolin, Greta Thunberg, and a couple of other young climate activists at Congress recently. And Greta so smartly, it was amazing what she said. She said, well, did you know that in Sweden, where I come from, nobody in Sweden wants to move because America's not moving. So this logic is used over and over again by a country that's not emitting as much, and then they'll say, well, I'm not going to do anything because look at this big polluter over here. And so, you know, it's such a wise thing to realize that everybody is using this logic to say, oh, we're not going to do anything. And so it's such a great sign that this firm has announced this, because it means that people are maybe not going to play that game for much longer. You know, obviously we live on one planet, so everybody's going to have to, you know, work on this.
Yeah, I think like Trump's climate denial is like, it's already so out of date with most people that I think of it as like a zit that's just going to really pop, you know, and then you know, then an explosion the other way is going to happen. We're going to see, you know, like this to me, this is what this week is about, is like this rapid shift is already happening. The zit's already popping. And then you're going to see all sorts of incentives coming out from finance that will be spearheading innovation. And you know, when you pour a lot of money into an idea, you get results. And I think that we're going to see actual alternative solutions that we haven't seen yet, out of nowhere, quite rapidly. And to me, like, this whole thing it's a shift. It's a shift in investment from old carbon-based economies to a new industrial revolution. And when times of great change occurred, it's usually a few different things that you weren't able to predict that all kind of collide to create this massive change. And I think that one way of understanding it is in terms of what the fourth industrial revolution is about. So when you look up fourth industrial revolution in Wikipedia, you get the following. The phrase fourth industrial revolution was first introduced by Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the WEF, World Economic Forum, in a 2015 article entitled Mastering the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It was the theme of the WEF in 2016, yada, yada. The forum announced the opening of its Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in San Francisco. I just want to kind of skip to where it talks about what it represents. So basically it includes technologies that combine hardware, software, and biology, and emphasizes advancements in communication and connectivity. Schwab expects this era to be marked by breakthroughs in emerging technologies in fields such as robotics, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, quantum computing, biotechnology, the Internet of Things, the Industrial Internet of Things, and the next one, decentralized consensus, fifth generation wireless, 5G, 3D printing, and fully autonomous vehicles. So that's the kind of Wikipedia definition of what the fourth industrial revolution is. But what's going to drive it? So some people believe that the impetus that will drive this rapid phase shift is actually decarbonization. And I've talked in the past about Thomas Stalker. I'll mention him again, but just yesterday, an article came out here in Canada in our Globe and Mail newspaper, and it's called How to Invest in the Next Industrial Revolution. And here's a quote. As the impact of climate change becomes more pronounced, interest in green investing is rising. But you have to look beyond the surface to understand why investing in companies focused on environmentally friendly technology offers a once-in-a-generation opportunity. That's the message from John Cook, president and CEO of Toronto-based asset management firm Green Chip Financial, who believes a new industrial revolution is underway as we move away from fossil fuels to solar, wind, and other sources of renewable energy. And then he says, we are in the middle of a great transition, adding that all investors should have some exposure to this emerging sector. Basically, yeah, that to me, that's the thing that's going to drive the fourth industrial revolution. decarbonization. It's as of this week, it's officially the largest hedge fund in the world's shifting priority. So I think there's no turning back now. The money is now behind it, and when the money's behind it, things happen.
Yes, I agree. I really was thinking a lot about Nora's comment about, it's sad that we have to wait until people's or investment portfolios are impacted before we start to get action.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. Thank you for saying that.
So I want to compare and contrast different experiences of the present moment. The present moment that's large enough to build the pyramids in Egypt, or to build the cathedrals in Europe. They were very different than the present moment that's focused on the value of your investment portfolio over a 10-year time frame, or even a 1-year time frame. And this is sort of the part of the issue, is that there's something wrong with economic models that don't include the longer arcs of time. If the economic models are focused on very, very short-term gains or losses, then people, they can narrow their attention down to this smaller region and not think about, and it's just the same thing with personal health, right? I think everyone has had to come to grips with, well, if I eat this now, I'm going to suffer later. And or if I don't eat this now, I'm going to suffer later. And learning and beginning to adjust this kind of awareness to longer and longer time horizons, so that you can have a better and better quality of life. And I think that this is something that our current economic models don't get right. There's no built-in marker or indicator within the economic models for these longer time horizons that have just as much impact on quality of life for the individual and for the communities and the world. Does this make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what's going to happen as we transition to the fourth industrial revolution, like Thomas Stalker says, when you look at the previous three, there's always pain involved in the transition, and it always destroys the things that we're used to. So like a shift happens. And he says that when you look at the past three ones, one thing that also happens is it creates new values and norms. And I think that when we kind of walk through this transition, we're going to actually witness a shift in how people conceive of their methods of investing. And the pressure that's coming is coming from the people. So investors are responding to customer demand. And like Fink mentioned, it represents a new generation. And I think that new generation is going to be looking at investing as more of a long-term future of the planet kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would look for not just long term, but rather that the way we think about economics captures this idea of these nested scopes these nested temporal scopes, right? So to make this less abstract, in the morning, can I think about yesterday morning and tomorrow morning? And can I think about this same morning a week ago and this same morning next week? And can I think about this same morning a year ago and this same morning a year from now and 7 years? Can I bring some presence to the whole of the scope of my lifespan on planet Earth, but recognizing that each of these different scopes, they're interrelated, right? So the quality of my life, in the yesterday morning, tomorrow morning, is closely connected to the quality of my life, 7 years ago, 7 years hence. And this is what I'm trying to get across, that it's not just a shift to long term, but rather it's an even richer, deeper shift to seeing how all of these scopes are interrelated. That's and that you can actually start to wrap some math around that, right? And that's the thing that's interesting to me, at least, is this notion of scale and scale invariance and how that fits into economics. Does that make sense, or did I lose people?
Well, when you talked about that stuff, it was kind of reminding me of certain ancient cultures that had a really long-term view of their cycles, like the Mayans that had like a 22,000 year cycle.
Sure.
And they seem to look at their whole philosophy on life through the eyes of kind of like these larger cycles. I don't know if that's connected to what you were talking about at all.
Yes, but what I'm trying to suggest is that it's not just that we have to like put all our attention on 20,000 year cycles, nor is it that we have to put all our attention on the next 5 minutes, right? But rather there's a different conception of our present moment that shows how each of those are connected. That what I'm doing in the 5 minute cycle is related to what I'm doing in a 2 day cycle, which is related to what I'm doing in a 14-day cycle, and so on. So that's the thing. So, when we talk about the universe in a grain of sand, we can kind of see that in the spatial way, that somehow there's a, or if you look at a fractal, you can kind of see that there's a relationship between a particular region of the fractal and the whole image. But we're sort of blind when it comes to the same kinds of scale invariance in the temporal dimension. But it's just as much there, right? This connection between all scales. How I make my cup of tea is how I live my life, kind of thing. And the point I'm trying to make is that this is super, super practical, because you can get the math for this, the math that can feed into the reimagining of our economic models is lovely. Like once you start to see what scale invariance means in terms of math and what that means in terms of economics, it starts to get very exciting. And that's sort of what that's what gets me interested. Apart from just wanting to make sure that my kids have a planet to live on, but it's also it's the solutions in terms of economic motivation and the framing of our economic behavior are pretty when we start to see the connections between these different temporal scales. Go ahead, sit.
Wow. I wish I could see those things that you see.
There's a blockchain for that.
Well, I guess fractals are a glimpse of it, but
yeah, fractals are a glimpse. if when you start looking at how programming languages are structured, you start to see a glimpse of that. So these are some of the ways that you can get a picture of what I'm talking
It seems to me
about.
like, Greg, you're talking about something like a fractal and then also compositionality, but then with time.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I got it. I
Yeah.
never get it. I'm so happy.
Yeah. So you know, and you know, in physics, we've long had this understanding that we can't, if we're going to talk about events and causal structures and things like that, we can't really separate space from time. And I want to suggest that this is also true of our economic agency. That genuine economic agency that is regenerative has to have this self-similar structure to it, where you begin to see the relationship between, you know, the local and the global. But here we're talking about local temporal behavior and global temporal behavior, or at least larger scale. Anyway, I'll shut up. Sure.
No, this is great. We need this to get us thinking in new ways. That's really important. Yeah.
Well, when I think about like global temporal, what did you say? Global temporal
Behavior.
It makes me think about the challenge that's different about the fourth industrial revolution is that it actually literally has to involve us all working together holistically as a planet. We need to achieve global self-awareness, which hasn't been achieved yet in our species.
Yeah, I think that's what you're saying is very important, because I mean, just because money gets behind something doesn't mean we have solutions, right? We could have the best science in the world,
right.
But you know, if there's still massive conflict between, you know, Syria and Lebanon, or whatever, wherever we might find this conflict, we're going to still have just as many problems. we're not going to resolve these things without, you know, without the kinds of shifts that you're talking about, the shifts in awareness. That, you know, the Amazon is a planetary resource. You know, it's not Brazil. But the same is true for lots and lots of things, right? The North American plains are really a planetary resource. And that's going to take some, like, for people to wrap their heads around that and say, oh wow, what does that mean in terms of, you know, where my ranch is sitting? Right. That's going to be a big change.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's exciting. I always find a glimmer of hope, you know, in all of this. It's so hard sometimes to find any hope, but there are glimmers if you look in the right places, you know.
Yeah, like, to me, I think that it has to come at this point from the financial world. At this point, like, money has to get poured into this, and so to me, it was just super encouraging to read those articles this week.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's that's an important step.
An important step, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not the it's not the end. It's only a step.
Yeah.
And when people start to like, it's almost better that people can't see how much change has to happen.
Yeah, right. It's like the finite game within the infinite one. It's one part of the whole thing. That's what I love about when you always correct us when we talk about the word sustainability and switch the term to regenerative. That's always stuck in my head now, and I thank you for that, because it's a very different word. It's almost like when we were talking about finite and infinite games last week. It's almost like sustainability is still kind of more of a finite game, yet regenerative thinking is more infinite.
It feels that way. In fact, the way I like to think about it, or the way I have thought about it in the past, is that, the regenerative thinking is how we, as beings with a finite lifespan, can touch the infinite. Right? We can have a sense of regeneration. Right? We know we have a felt sense of renewal. We know what that feels like, and at the same time, we also, when we think about mathematical models of the infinite, recursion is our way of handling the infinite, or different these kinds of schemes. Are ways of handling the infinite. So this is our framework or view on the infinite, and regeneration is, it's just how we can touch it.
Can you explain recursion in the context of what you're talking about?
Yeah. So it's. You can think about, so let's talk about the natural numbers, right? So the natural numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, they go on forever, right? And if we try to get our hands around the thing that goes on forever without any sort of skill or subtlety, it's impossible. It's beyond our grasp, because we don't have enough lifespan to bring our attention to bear on every number. But we can certainly understand +1. Whatever you give me, I can add 1 to it, right? And so that's a kind of recursive thing. So I can start with 0, and I can add 1, and that gives me 1. And from 1, I can add 1, and that gives me 2, and so on. So this kind of loopy behavior, where the thing, you could think of it as talking about itself a little bit. But that add 1 can be likened to the moment of regeneration or renewal. So the natural numbers are isomorphic to 1 plus the natural numbers. So that's how we write down the equation. So if I have the set of all natural numbers, or the gadget that represents the natural numbers, then adding 1 to it doesn't change it. It's still, the add 1 behavior lives inside that thing. So you can think of it either as it's the fixed point of adding 1, but you can also see it as a procedure. I add 1, I add 1, but that going around the loop and adding 1, that is a mathematical, sort of our first mathematical glimpse of regenerative ideation. We regenerate our conception of the natural numbers by adding a fresh number every time. Does that make sense?
Yes, very helpful. Thanks.
Oh, good. And Ian,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, after you.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just wondering if anybody had anything else they wanted to add that was very important, because we only have about 10 minutes left. So I just wanted to send out a little reminder about that, if anybody else had anything they wanted to bring up that was really important. But Greg, go on, please.
No, it's okay. I mean, I guess I should mention, since this is, an R-chain thing, that we're about 15 days away from mainnet launch. And we're 1 day away from the AskPro exchange launching a staking campaign. So they're accepting Rock for staking. So if people are interested in joining a staking pool, AskPro is offering that. They're a Chinese-based exchange, and we're excited to be working with them. And even though this seems to be mostly about economics, again, the point is to build out an infrastructure, a kind of global computer that will help us do the kind of coordination that we're going to need to do to address climate change. I know that, I don't know if anyone saw, Naomi Klein recently published an article
Oh, I love
in
her.
which she
She's so
talked
great.
about, she talks about how, we won't get to, she doesn't use this language, but essentially we won't get to the kind of regenerative culture that is necessary without a fundamental economic shift. And that's closely related to the topics that we were talking about. And in order to effect that economic shift, we're going to have a pretty big coordination mechanism.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, I mean, that's what brings it so full circle. It's
Yep.
amazing. Greg, I always marvel at your ability to connect these things. I have to say, it's amazing. Yeah, well, this is so exciting. I mean, congratulations to everybody who's been working really closely on mainnet. I know it's been so much work, but this is very exciting. I mean, we're starting the year off with these great announcements. This is great.
yeah, I'm really hoping, I'm hoping that the date, the official date that we launch is February 4th, because that would be my birthday, and I couldn't imagine a better birthday present than to have shipped mainnet.
Why eat a cake when you could just eat a blockchain instead? Well, no, this is really exciting. So, okay, well, I think we can maybe end on that note because it's so positive. And happy early birthday to you, Greg.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. And unless anybody has anything else to add, I will do the closing remarks, if that's okay. So I guess, okay. Well, thank you so much to everybody who has contributed today on the call. We're looking forward to having some more guests in the future. If you'd like to become a member of RChain, you can do that at www.rchain.coop. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get more talks like this. And we are so happy to have this call. So if anybody in the community from RChain or beyond wants to be a guest, please just email us at climate@rchain.coop. And that is that.